I was 4 years old. I did not have language yet for what was happening around me. Nevertheless, I understood it. I knew that every adult in my life was making decisions about me without asking me anything. I suppose that is what it's like to grow up inside of a Sunni Muslim polygamy structure within an African household where the pecking order is not explained, but the pecking order is enforced. You do not get to question it as a child. You do not get to opt out of it. But what you must do is you must learn to read it. And so I did. You see, by the time I was 4 years old, without anyone teaching me, I understood one thing clearly. Being perceived as bright was not just a compliment, it became a strategy. It was the only leverage available to a child like me who had no vote, no voice, in a household full of adults who had already decided how things would go. They saw me as a smart child, so they treated me differently at times. They saw me as exceptional, so they gave me access they would not give to others. I did not have a name for that, but I ran with it every day, which kind of made me not so good at making friends within my peer group because I became a know it all. And I guess nobody likes a know it all. But I didn't really care. That false sense of security was a leverage that I used to my advantage. By the time I was 6 years old, I had the courage to run away from home. Now, I did not get far, of course, but that was never the point. The point was that I moved. I moved in a household where children did not question, where the culture demanded that you accept the conditions handed to you. I know it's hard to imagine, but take a moment and imagine a 6 year old putting one foot in front of the other and walking out the door. Don't call it a form of rebellion because it was not. It was a test. Can I move in this environment on my own terms? What happens when I do? What does the room do when I refuse to stay still? See, I was learning without a classroom. I was learning without a framework. I was learning to position myself before I acted. What's good with you? Welcome back to another episode of the I Don't Subscribe with yours truly, Ibrahim Dafe. And today I want to take you somewhere most leadership conversations never go. Not a boardroom, not yet. I want to take you back to Freetown, Sierra Leone. Again, I want to remind you though that this is the show where the two aces meet. I'm referring to the adverse childhood experience as well as adverse community environment. Where those two things collide, something gets built. Not in spite of the collision, but because of it. This show is built for the executive who already knows that the framework they were given was never designed for the moment they are actually in. I cannot continue this show without reminding you that this episode is powered by none other than House of Lone Wolf, where survival intelligence becomes the executive's sharpest competitive edge. When the framework fails, and it does, Remember that survival intelligence wins. If you would like to know more about that, consider houseoflonewolf.com as your starting point. That is houseoflonewolf.com. Now let's get back to work. My paternal grandparents' house was in a prime location. It's been more than 30 plus years since I've been there, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I can taste it. Pause. It reminded you of what was in Sierra Leone because next door was the parking lot of the main hospital of Sierra Leone called Connaught Hospital. Across the street from the house, diagonally to the left, was Sierra Leone Grammar School. This is the place that gave Sierra Leone the nickname as the Athens of West Africa, because it is where the first European curriculum was taught. It is also known as Regent Square Municipal School. As far as the eyes can see, is the landmark of Sierra Leone. Many locals would tell you that this place is neck and neck with any landmark you want to think of around the world, whether it's the Eiffel Tower, whether it's the Statue of Liberty, the Big Ben, you name it. Sierra Leone cotton tree wrapped its arms around freed West Indies enslaved people, freed Black American enslaved people once upon a time. So much so that they named the capital city of Sierra Leone Freetown. Down the block from there is King Jimmy Market. My grandmother and I stood on that blood-soaked ground of atrocities while she sell her smoked fish, her palm oil, vegetables, fruits, you name it. Historians call the place the point of no return as well as point of return of Africa. Oh, by the way, our backyard is the Atlantic Ocean. So while the house sit on top of the hill, right below all of that was the slum of Sierra Leone, Dombe or Krube. Two worlds separated by a slope. And I traveled between them on foot by the time I was old enough to make the trip alone. Because after all, I was not always in the mood to beg people for water. So if I wasn't going to beg for water, then I would have to go down to Dombe. I would have to bathe in there. I will have to wash my clothes. I will also have to use the restroom there. I come from that world where I ate with my right hand because we had no silverware. Silverware was reserved for the adults. And I washed the shit out of my ass with my left hand. I come from the world where the words of James Baldwin still echoes. Hope must be reinvented every day because we sleep in darkness 300 plus days out the year. We breathe the same dust that we have stepped on all throughout the day. That's the world I came from. And as a child, I would walk many miles all throughout Freetown, visiting families that were not mine. Again, I say this jokingly, but I came out my mother's womb free. And I was always able to roam the streets of Sierra Leone without anybody telling me otherwise. So it was not a big deal for me to just get dressed and just go somewhere. I don't announce myself. And I will visit different households. I will visit different dynamics, different rules, different ways of being. I was not just visiting, but I was studying. I was studying every household I walk into because it taught me something that my own could not. How different families will handle their conflict, how different mothers move through their own difficult circumstances, how different men carry themselves when the weight of the environment was pressing on them. It didn't matter my age, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It didn't matter. I was taking inventory. What I was building without knowing I was building anything was a database. Not of information, though, a database of environments. I was learning to read a room before I walk into it. Because in Sierra Leone, it was normal for the adults to say to you, Bokomonaya. That is Creole for get out of here. Children was constantly being shooed away. Constantly shooed away. So it was crucial for one to sense the temperature for a household before making their first move inside of it. To identify where the power actually live, not the formal power, not who had the title, but who in the room held the real influence over how things went. As a child in Freetown, I was doing what the best crisis navigators in the most expensive boardrooms in the world do before a high-stake meeting. Environmental scanning. I was stakeholder mapping, resource assessment. You guessed it. But I just called it going to visit people. Now, here's where it gets interesting because that same child eventually walked into a classroom and ran into his first real test of what happens when your read is more accurate than the official version of events. It was frowned upon to challenge the teachers in school. But I did just that. Not to be disrespectful, I challenged them precisely. I questioned the methodology. I would push back on the premise. I would ask the question the room was not asking. I would ask the question everyone else in the classroom felt but did not say. But I understand why they were doing that. Because in Sierra Leone, physical punishment in school for questioning was a real thing. So I would spend a third of my day try to cool the sting sensation in my backside just because I was questioning. But I was out of this world. I still was able to put that to the side while maintaining the top 1% of my entire school. Yes, I did not go to the 4th grade. I did not go to the 6th grade. In fact, I was 12 years old as a freshman in high school in Sierra Leone. So I never stopped doing it. I continuously questioned. I continuously challenged, not because I was reckless, because I had already learned something that the institution had not taught me. See, my read of the room was often more accurate than the official version of events. And surrendering that read to avoid discomfort, well, as far as I was concerned, it was more expensive than the punishment for keeping it. So here's what I want you to sit with. How many executives in your orbit, how many leaders in rooms you have been in have swallowed, pause, that sounds crazy, an accurate read because the room was not ready to receive it, because the cost of being right in the wrong way felt higher than the cost of staying quiet. I learned as a child that the cost of staying quiet when your intelligence is accurate is higher than any punishment the institution can administer. So, yes, the flagellation ends. The consequence of unused intelligence do not. So now let me give you an illustration of what that looks like in a professional context, because this is not theoretical. This is what position or the absence of it actually produces in a real room. Here's an illustration I would like to paint for you. Imagine an executive in a serious role, serious stakes, walking into a board meeting that she had been preparing for 3 weeks. She had the data, she had the narrative, she had the solution. And the night before, she asked one question: what am I missing? So you asked her one thing back in reply: what does the room actually need from you tomorrow, not what you plan to give it? In that moment, she's quiet. That quiet said everything. She had prepared for the meeting she expected to walk into. She had not positioned herself for the meeting that was actually waiting for her. There's a difference. And that difference almost always is the difference between a room that receives you and a room that closes against you. The next morning, she arrived 20 minutes early. She watched people enter. She listened to the conversations before the meeting was called to order. She noticed who sat next to whom and who deliberately did not. And she adjusted. Not her solution, not her approach, not her sequence. The person she spoke to first. The question she opened with instead of the statement she had planned. Now, obviously, the meeting did not go perfectly, but it went. And when her colleague asked her afterward what made the difference, she said something like, I stopped presenting and started reading. This is what I learned as a child in Freetown, figuring out without anyone teaching me. You stop performing and you start reading. You position before you act. The child on that hill, walking down into Dombe to study different household, was not being curious. He was building the most valuable executive capability that no MBA program has ever formally taught. But I want to be honest about the other side of this, because I carried that same intelligence into environments where I did not always use it correctly. I walked into many rooms in the South Bronx where I moved too fast. I walked into ministry with the right read and the wrong sequence. I walked into corporate environments and acted from where I was standing and not from where the situation was going. And every time I did that, every time I skipped the positioning, I paid for it. not with flagellation, with something harder. You see, relationships that closed before they had a chance to open. Rooms that made their decision about me before I had given them the accurate version of who I was. Opportunities that required a version of me that I had not positioned properly to present. The intelligence was always there. The discipline to slow down enough to use it, well, that took longer at times. And that gap between having the intelligence and having the discipline to deploy it is the gap I see in every high performing executive who still occasionally loses rooms they should have won. They have the read. They move before their position. That is a solvable problem. I know it because I solved it in conditions that offered me no grace period. So here's what I want you to carry out of this episode. Before your next high stake moment, your next board meeting, your next difficult conversation, your next room that will decide something important, give yourself the positioning window. Not hesitation, positioning. What is this room actually showing me, not what I walked in expecting? Who in this room holds the real influence over how this resolves? What does the environment actually need from me right now, not what I plan to give it? 3 questions, 60 seconds. As a child in Freetown, I was running that sequence before I had words for it. The executive listening to this right now has been running it too. The work is learning to run it by choice instead of by accident. I built a framework around exactly this. It is called the 7-minute executive crisis framework. The first phase is the position activation. And that's what this entire episode was about. It is free, 14 pages. Visit houseoflonewolf.com and start there. Now, if this episode gave you something, please consider to pass it to one leader in your network who is about to walk into a room they have not yet positioned for. Not for the numbers, because they need it. Please consider to subscribe. Share this. Turn your notification on because we are back. 2 episodes every week from now on, and we're not stopping. You heard? But before I go, once again, special shout out to House of Lone Wolf for sponsoring this episode. Visit houseoflonewolf.com because when your MBA framework fails you, survival intelligence would win. I'm Ibrahim Dafe. I don't subscribe. Let's face it. Truth is rare. You dig?
Yeah.